Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order definitely isn't perfect, but it's the first single-player Star Wars game in years, and, unlike EA's recent offerings, it's actually pretty good.
Whoa!
I said it in the intro, which means it's real. The game has just broken EA sales records, but what does all that actually mean? Here to talk about it with me, Henry Cooper, and to ding that bell, evidently, is Mr. Gareth Evans. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm always dinging my bell. Always ready to ding my bell.
So, the point is, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has just broken a couple of EA's sales records. Now, that sounds really impressive, that sounds really good, but hold your horses, because it's not necessarily the biggest thing in the world. So, Business Wire were reporting a press release from EA, which said, in the first 2 weeks, EA achieves fastest selling digital launch for Star Wars games ever, becomes EA's top selling Star Wars title on PC in its initial launch window. So, essentially, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order has smashed it in terms of digital game sales and PC game sales.
Absolutely. Great headlines, just what they wanted to hear, probably. I mean, if you smash sales in any game that you release, you're going to be happy, and I'm sure they're happy with this.
I mean, single players are dead though, right? They don't make any money.
Well, not quite. Obviously they're wrong.
Well, a huge caveat I've kind of been a stickler for here is that it's not total sales, it's just digital. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the game outsold other games like Star Wars Battlefront 1 or Star Wars Battlefront 2, which actually sold less than the first one. Anyway, we'll get onto that. The game had a decent physical launch, but not as good as perhaps it could have been, because the game debuted at number 2, which was just behind Pokemon Sword and just above Pokemon Shield, and that was on the UK physical game charts. So again, it's not entirely representative of everything, but physically it's nowhere near as good as it was digitally. And Star Wars Battlefront, the original one, did have a pretty strong physical launch sale because people didn't know quite how bad it was, so they jumped in anyway. But then by the time Battlefront 2 came out, people were a little bit wiser, and there was a bunch of controversy with loot boxes. Everyone knows that, it's no point in retreading old ground, but that game sold 60% less.
60% less than the original Battlefront, right?
Yeah, so Battlefront, it did sell well, so Fallen Order has strong competition, but now according to the site Kit Guru, which doesn't accurately source where it got its information, so do take this with a pinch of salt, but what it says is that the game didn't outsell Battlefront 1 or 2 based on physical numbers. So Battlefront 1 sold 334,000 units, Battlefront 2 was 130,000 units, and Fallen Order was just 89,000 units. So that suggests that the game had a abysmal physical launch in comparison to everything else. So if you put that in context with the digital stuff, it's not necessarily the biggest thing ever that they broke this record.
Exactly. You're talking in the ballpark of 250,000 copies fewer than the original Battlefront 1. It's notable that the headline that they chose to go with was digital copies, we broke records.
Yeah.
Said nothing about the physical copies.
And it definitely is a good thing that they sold this well. I'm saying the game's really good. I like it a lot. It's got plenty of problems, but we'll get to that. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows over at the Fallen Order camp.
Maybe not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Because we don't know exactly what the actual unit sales of digital were and what the percentage is of each platform is. Because if Battlefront 1 sold fewer digital copies, obviously it did, because Fallen Order has broken the record now. Did Fallen Order sell more than 250,000 more copies digitally? I doubt it, because otherwise they probably would have led with that headline, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in the press release from EA, they mention no actual figures at all. It's just a brag to say, we're proud of ourselves, we beat this record, but that record isn't necessarily representative of all the facts.
Yeah, you would think that if they've got a bigger record to shout about, they would use that bigger record rather than the kind of very specific record that they're shouting about here.
It's very important to note that the whole games industry is making a massive move towards digital in general, so such a success on the digital platform does kind of make sense, because physical is going the way of the dodo. It's not going to be around for that much longer. And according to Eurogamer, back in January, UK game sales were 80% digital, and that was a huge increase. So it's not surprising that digital was so big, and it feels like this record, while it is impressive, may not actually be that show-stopping, because the industry is more geared towards digital anyway, so it's come out at quite an advantageous time.
Exactly. And EA have another revenue model on top of this, remember, which is the subscription service. So these figures obviously don't take into account the amount of people who paid for a subscription to EA Access or whatever, Origin Access, and played the game through there, how much money they've made from the game through that platform, and therefore the amount of actual game sales day one or the first 2 weeks will probably be lower because the people who use the subscriptions to play the games don't count as day one sales, don't count as any sale at all.
One important thing to note as well, I think is interesting, is that EA have a Star Wars game called Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. In case you don't know, it's a mobile game.
That's why I missed it.
That's all I need to leave it at. I was going to elaborate, but that's all you need to know.
Let's move
mobile
on.
Game from 2015, so obviously that's digital only. And now, according to a website called Sensor Tower, which covers all kind of mobile and app statistics, that game has 200,000 downloads. Now, if Fallen Order has beaten all of the EA Star Wars games, that's what the record reads, all EA Star Wars games, digitally, it must include that. And if any company were to include a mobile game in their records, it's going to be EA because they love them. But that does mean that Fallen Order has beaten that, so we can assume that it's sold digitally more than 200,000 copies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think there's any dispute here that this is a win for EA. This is the kind of headlines that they wanted to be reading. And obviously there's a lot of reasons that have contributed to the success of this game. One of which that the fans were just absolutely starving for Star Wars games. There's been how many? We're comparing to the other Star Wars games of this console generation, but there's only been 2 other ones. Yeah. So that in 5-6 years, whatever, it just goes to show people need these Star Wars games. And also, it's a game without bullshit. There's no microtransactions in there. There's no additional monetization in there. It's just a straight up game. You pay for the game, you play the game, you finish the game. End of. There's none of that bullshit in there. And I think that again, players and the communities are screaming out for those types of games. And it proves to EA that these types of business models can succeed.
And there's sort of conspiracy theories going around that the reason the game was getting 9s from certain review outlets was just because it was a Star Wars game and just to send a message to EA, because personally I don't think it's a 9 out of 10 game. I'm having a lot of fun with it, but it's not that good. It is just a solid game, and it's a question of whether or not that's enough for you as a player. Hopefully it's enough for the game to push through and maybe even get a sequel or different games in the Star Wars license that aren't just multiplayer driven things from different developers as well, not just Respawn.
Another reason why the game probably succeeded was this whole story was new characters, new setting,
new planets and everything,
loads of new stuff for people to explore, for people who love the franchise. And like you said about the sequel, obviously the game wasn't perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect for it to be a success, and we've discussed that in the past. And they've made a great game in the right way here, and I've seen success on the back of it, and hopefully this incentivizes them to do the same in future and make that sequel with more polish this time, please. And maybe other games in Star Wars universe, maybe a Mandalorian game. That would be pretty bloody awesome.
The show is basically structured like a video game anyway. It makes so much sense.
It would be awesome.
Why can't you just resurrect the Star Wars 1313 game, all about the underbelly of Coruscant? That's what we all want, because it would be amazing.
But the underlying question to me is, yes, it's a success. It's probably profitable. We can't know that for sure because we don't know how much money went into the generation or producing of this game. Probably profitable. However, when they consider the future, what they do with the next game, they've got to weigh up how much money they did make on this game versus how much money they could have made if they'd have thrown microtransactions in. And that's where the seed of doubt comes, because this is EA, and they're probably more focused on the amount of money, net revenue, that they can make on any single one game, rather than how successful it is with the fans and the communities.
Yeah, net revenue and total sales are something you kind of got to get your head around these days when it comes to the modern video game industry. They are two different things. Total sales is the amount of physical and digital quote-unquote copies, because you don't really get a digital copy, that people have bought. But then net revenue is all of that plus any microtransactions, any loot boxes, any DLC, map packs or expansions or anything. That's all lumped into one.
Minus expenses, right?
Yeah, so then a game like Star Wars Battlefront will inevitably make more money for EA than Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, because it's got all the sales but also microtransaction payments, hundreds and thousands of microtransaction payments in the form of what they call them crystals, since they took out the loot boxes. But a really interesting thing I think to note here, which we can kind of close things out on, is that EA expected this game to perform lower than Star Wars Battlefront 2. Fallen Order was expected to ship 6 to 8 million units, but Battlefront 2 was meant to ship 10 million, but that game actually only sold 9 million, and that was partly due to the controversy. And that's still a really big number. Pretty sure everyone pointed this out at the time. 9 million units is still a huge number. It's just not good enough for EA. And we can't necessarily say if in total the game outperformed Battlefront, but in terms of digital only, according to the records, it definitely did, which is a huge success for this game, especially in the face of not that much confidence in it from EA. And in the earnings call where this projection figure comes from, they were talking about how it's like the perfect time for it because there's the movie coming out, there's the TV show. They say it as if it wasn't all planned. Of course it was. It's Star Wars season. You put it all out at once. But this is a huge win for the Star Wars brand, especially with Mandalorian being so good. Hopefully Rise of Skywalker will be good. Maybe Star Wars is good again. Maybe we can walk through the pearly gates of heaven. And then finally, along with the press release, head of Respawn, Vince Zampella, gave us this quote, and I think it's just a nice way to wrap things up on a positive note because this game is good, it's sold well, not necessarily the ultimate game changer for the Star Wars gaming landscape, but it's still a huge step in the right direction. So this reads, on behalf of Respawn and EA, we thank everyone for their support of the studio and the team throughout the development and launch of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Telling a story in the Star Wars galaxy is a dream come true, and the reception from fans has been incredible. With the launch of the game, the debut of The Mandalorian, and the upcoming release of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, it's a great time to be a Star Wars fan.
Isn't it just?
I really hope that's the case. We just got to hope Star Wars Rise of Skywalker is good and they can get 3 in a row that are good, but who knows? I'm not entirely filled with confidence, but it might be good. I hope so. Well, anyway, that's the end of the video. Bye.
At least we got the Mandalorian, even if
we still got 5 more episodes of that, so there's still time for them to tank it, but I like the show.
It's all right so far.
Anyway, that's just what we think about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order breaking these records and how they are very, very impressive, but don't necessarily believe the hype. But we can all hope that the future of Star Wars single-player content is secure. Anyway, let us know down in the comments if you played the game. Is the lack of polish in certain areas just too much for you? Or are you sick of these Souls-like clones and it's Souls for babies or whatever people keep saying? I'm really enjoying it. Anyway, I've been Henry, he's been Gaz. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.